think it must sound horrible in your ears, but I want to give it a try. So, it is my pleasure to reply to the talk given by Elke Schmidt. She addresses the question of whether and how Kant can solve the trolley problem and how this Kantian solution to the trolley problem can be applied to the programming of an autonomously driving vehicle. In principle, I share Schmidt's proposal of a Kantian solution to the trolley problem, according to which the driver has a narrow duty of omission, not to kill the one person, and a wide duty of commission to help the 5 people. Since narrow duties trump wide duties, it is morally forbidden, imperative, not to turn the vehicle. Schmidt calls her approach wide-narrow interpretation. I find her approach carefully considered and fundamentally convincing, but perhaps we can still make another Kantian solution plausible. To this end, I would like to draw attention to an important point of the interpretation of Kant and raise a systematic question that Schmidt has already discussed in her objection 3. Is it plausible to evaluate the trolley situation differently by means of the principle of double effect, for short PDE? And if so, is this also compatible with Kant's ethics? To conclude, I shall discuss the problem for the programmer of an autonomous vehicle. Schmidt rightly points out that, quote, according to Kant, one cannot weigh the value of persons. The reason for this is the dignity of persons. End of quote. And she says, next quote, thus, one may not sacrifice one person for another, nor may one sacrifice one person for 5. Quote end. So far, so good. But what about cases in which I do not sacrifice one person to save 5, but have to choose between saving one person or saving 5? Let us take a modified example. We suffer shipwreck. I have already managed to swim ashore, and then I see that at the same distance there is both a plank floating with one person holding on it who is in danger of drowning, and a plank with 5 people holding on it who are in danger of drowning. But I can only reach one plank before disaster takes its course and initiate the rescue operation. Since it simply makes no sense here to talk about sacrificing the one person when we save the 5, it appears obligatory to save the 5 persons. It certainly is permissible. In this case, we have 2 wide duties, and we are at least permitted to fulfill the wide duty of saving the 5 persons. Or we have one wide duty, the scope of which allows us to save the 5 people or one person. Anyway, we do not violate any narrow duty in doing so, because we do not kill or sacrifice the one person in order to save the 5. Presumably, Schmidt would also agree here. In Schmidt's interpretation, however, we cannot simply apply this approach to the trolley problem, because here, see her option 2, we are not dealing with 2 wide duties, but with one narrow duty, to wit, not to kill one person, and one wide duty, to wit, to save the 5. And again, the narrow duty trumps the wide duty. But do we even have to conceive of the trolley situation in this way? Do we really kill the one person in a morally significant sense? Or are we perhaps just accepting the death of this person in parallel with our modified plant example? This idea that we do not kill the one person in a morally significant sense when we divert the trolley is in principle mapped by the PDE, against which Schmidt argues in her objection 3. Suppose we defend the PDE and apply it as a template to the Kantian interpreted situation. For the 4 conditions of the PDE to be fulfilled, the death of the person that is killed is not a means to an end, his or her death is not intended, the action is morally indifferent, and the death of one person is proportionate to the survival of the 5, it is not entirely far-fetched to assume that these 4 conditions are met in the trolley case. Diverting a trolley as such is morally indifferent, the death of the one person is not a means to an end, rather the diversion is. The death of the one person is not intended, but merely put up with, and the death of the one person is proportionate to the survival of the 5 people. Hence, the previous consideration of Kant that the survival of the 5 people should be preferred to the survival of 1 person. If we accept this, then perhaps it does not make sense after all to argue that the driver must not divert the car, because the fact that 1 person dies when the car is diverted must not be interpreted as an act of killing in a morally significant sense. In arguing against Ford, Schmidt emphasizes that not diverting the car, which results in 5 people dying, is not an act of killing in the morally significant sense. However, if we accept the PDE for a Kantian solution to the trolley problem, the same applies, I argue, to diverting the trolley. There is no act of killing here. We are not sacrificing the person in a narrow sense to save the others, nor we are weighing the dignity of that person against that of the other persons. And if this is true, then the driver cannot have a narrow duty to divert the trolley. Can we then still uphold the wide narrow interpretation? Well, there is still, of course, a narrow duty not to kill anyone. But in our case, there is no longer any narrow duty, because regardless of whether we divert or not, we do not have a case of killing. At most, negligent homicide, but that does not make much sense because the driver is not drunk or anything like that. We have, this could be the solution, only a wide duty to save the 5, and there is a side effect that we put up with. On the other hand, we do not also have a wide duty to save the 1 person, because, as Schmidt herself has argued against her option 2, this is not an adequate description of the situation, since the 1 person is not in danger at all without the driver's intervention. Schmidt has explained that, quote, the principle of double effect plays no role for Kant and runs counter to the basic idea of his ethics, end of quote. If we realize, however, that this is only a very special dilemma situation and consider that the situation is not that we sacrifice 1 person to save 5 others, but only make a decision whether 1 person dies or 5 people die, then we can uphold Kant's ethics as well as a wide narrow interpretation and still argue that there are cases in which we cannot easily apply it, and perhaps the trolley problem is one of them. In principle, it is also quite clear that the Kant's formula of humanity states that, quote, act in such a way that you use humanity both in your person and in the person of everyone else at all times as an end, never merely as a means, quote end. In our case, one is not using 1 person as a means. If one did, the action would be prohibited even by the PDE. Therefore, it is not entirely far-fetched that the decision to divert the vehicle is in fact also compatible with Kantian ethics. One last point. Schmidt talks about her interpretation very being much applied to the very specific theoretical trolley situation. Schmidt will certainly agree when I say that the factual situation changes rapidly once individual parameters change in the scenario. And that is the big problem that the programmer has to solve. Let's stay with Schmidt's narrow-wide interpretation for the sake of argument. The driver must not divert if it is clear that no one can be saved or can save himself. But what if there are possibilities or probabilities that the sole person on the 1 rail can be saved, perhaps even independently of the question of whether any of the 5 people on the other rail can be saved? It is more likely that 1 person can be saved in the time until the vehicle arrives than 5 people can be saved. Suppose there was a 50% probability that 1 person could be saved, but it was 100% certain that not at all or none could be saved on the other track. Would Kant still not divert the car? We can see that Kant basically takes something like probabilities into account in his philosophy by looking at his comments on the smallpox vaccination, for he argues that anyone allows himself to be inoculated is, quote, venturing his life into the unknown and putting himself in moral danger. And if Kant quite fundamentally includes probabilities in his ethical considerations, we can assume that Kant would also solve the trolley problem differently if parameters change and there is a probability that someone can be saved. In any case, the programmer must include all possibilities in his considerations, and that is a difficult task. Thank you for your attention.